we are drawn towards what is presented to us in a compelling and persuasive way, which means that when you are speaking to executives, they're going to be drawn to the leaders and the people within the company who know how to present work and ideas to them in an appealing and compelling way. And this means you have to go beyond just talking about the work, and you have to highlight the way the work is benefiting them and adding value for them and the organization.
Welcome to The Art of Speaking Up, a podcast that helps professional women access the limitless potential that lies within them. I'm your host, Jessica Guzik, and my mission is to help you find that spark inside you that has the power to transform your career in ways you may not have thought possible. I'm so excited that you're here. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here. I am so excited to dive into today's episode. Today, I'm teaching you the 4 fundamental components of executive communication. If you are wanting to be super impressive when you speak, if you want to learn how to be persuasive, how to get buy-in, how to frame your ideas in a way that really makes you look credible and impressive as a leader, today I'm going to teach you the fundamental building blocks of how to do that. You're going to learn my 4-part framework, which goes by the acronym STAR. I'm going to teach you each of the 4 parts of the framework so that you feel crystal clear on exactly how to impress your audience with the way that you speak. And by the way, I will say that when it comes to executive communication, one of the biggest things that keeps people stuck is not necessarily that they don't know what to say or that they can't learn it and they can't get good at it, but actually that they assume that the people around them are somehow better or smarter or more charming or more charismatic than they are. And because the people around them have these qualities that they are missing, they assume that communicating in a way that is crisp and potent and powerful is possible for other people, but just isn't possible for them. And this is actually a belief that I had in my corporate career. Before I became a full-time coach and before I did this podcast full-time, I had a 9-to-5 career and I really struggled at the beginning. It took me many years to find my voice and become successful and become a confident executive. But before that happened, I deeply struggled with self-confidence. And I remember when I was in my first ever job, I worked at McKinsey, which is a global management consultant company. I remember feeling like everyone around me was smarter and that they had this way of saying things so smoothly, so smartly, just in such an impressive way. And then I felt like when I would open my mouth to speak, it would be a mess. Like what would come out would be such a mess. And no amount of me planning it out in my head and going in circles about how to say it, like no amount of me doing that was preventing the words from coming out of my mouth messy and fumbly and just not the way that I wanted them to sound at all. And one of the big things that helped me get past that was learning to stop telling myself the story that I was somehow worse than other people. This is something that I talk about when I'm coaching my clients inside of the Art of Speaking Up Academy. The thoughts that we have about ourselves and about whether we're good enough and about how smart we are, all of those thoughts affect how smooth and confident we are when we speak. So it's so important that if you have any thoughts that people are better than you or smarter than you, or you're not capable of getting good at executive communication, it is so important that you find that inner strength within you to challenge those thoughts. That is what I did when I was in my corporate career, and that is what helped me finally start to build the confidence. I started to fight back against the thoughts that I was having that were telling me that I was worse and dumber and more awkward than everyone else. And I started to say to myself, you know what? I'm going to try. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I do have this capability within me. So I really want you to fight back in that same way, because ultimately, when you start to feel like, maybe I can do this, maybe I am capable, that's when all of the tips and advice that I'm sharing will actually sink in. Because you could know what I'm sharing intellectually, but if deep down inside, you still don't feel good about yourself when you're sitting in the room, then it's going to be hard for you to implement these tips. So as a first step, I want you to commit to fighting back against any thoughts that you have that everyone's smarter than you, and that's why they sound so great when they speak. And I want you to realize that it's just a combination of learning to believe in yourself, learning to disconnect from some of those negative thoughts that tell you that you're not good enough and you're not as smart as other people, and learning a few simple skills, which I'm going to teach you and outline in today's episode. So I want you to think about this episode as covering the foundations, the basics that you need to know to get good at executive communication. And by the way, executive communication just means that when you speak, your words are so concise, so crisp, so persuasive that even an executive audience would be super impressed by the way that you package and share information. This is something that you can learn if you give yourself the chance to really believe that you can speak just like the other people in the room who are so charming and so good at it. And that's what I'm going to help you do today. So we're going to follow the acronym STAR, STAR. These are the 4 foundations that make up really good, really impressive executive communication. And this acronym is an acronym I created. It's a framework that I have developed based on my time as a coach and all of the years that I spent in my corporate career being in the room with executives and learning how to share my work with them in a way that would leave them feeling really impressed by the work that I was doing, and also in a way that would help me get buy-in. Okay, so let's start with the first S of the acronym STAR. And as I share each letter, I want you to see if you can guess what the letter stands for. So the first letter in STAR is S. Obviously, we know that. What do you think S stands for? Now, there's a couple directions it could go in, but in my acronym, the S stands for simple. So if you got that right, give yourself a little round of applause. The S stands for simple. Executive communication needs to be simple because our executive audience is busy and their minds are full and they don't have a lot of extra mental capacity to untangle complicated sentences and ideas. So it is our job as the person who is sharing our work with them or leading them through our meeting, it is our job to make it super simple for them. The best way for you to really internalize this at a deep level is to imagine yourself as a super busy C-suite executive. So I want you to pick whatever C-suite role you would love to have or that would be a big dream of yours. Or I know some of you listening are in C-suite roles. So in that case, maybe just imagine a bigger C-suite role than the one you're in. But I want you all to think about landing a very high-level leadership position. You're extremely busy. You're making big decisions all day long. You're on major meetings and investor calls, and your day is filled back to back with lots of important obligations and conversations. So I want you to imagine that you're a busy executive and you've reached the end of your day. Let's just imagine it's Monday. You're at the end of the day Monday. It's been a long, full day of meetings and decision-making and key conversations. And then at the end of the day, your assistant comes up to you and says, hey, we need to move one of your meetings tomorrow morning to make room for some unexpected travel that we're having to fit into your calendar. So I need you to decide, do you want me to move your one-on-one with Amy, or do you want me to move your one-on-one with Brenda? So your executive assistant is asking you, hey, which of these 2 meetings do you want me to move and bump into the future? Now, you have to decide. Now, let me tell you about Amy and Brenda. You have had meetings with both of them in the past, and Amy is someone who, whenever you have a meeting with her, she shares things in a way that is a bit long. It can feel a bit complicated. She shares a lot of details. You have to really focus hard think hard, ask questions. That is Amy's style of sharing information. Brenda's style of sharing information is very simple and minimalist. She gives you a high-level overview of what she's going to talk to you about. She keeps the details in the appendix and shares minimal details with you. And she makes it really easy and cohesive for you to take in the information. Okay, so when your executive assistant asks you at the end of the day, which of tomorrow's meetings do you want to bump into the future? Are you going to bump Amy's meeting or are you going to bump Brenda's meeting? For most of us, we're going to bump Amy because what happens in our minds is we think, oh my gosh, her stuff is so complicated. It's so mentally draining. I'm already tired. It's the end of the day and I'm thinking about all my meetings tomorrow and I don't really want to start the day with something that's going to be so mentally demanding. So yeah, let me keep the meeting with Brenda. Brenda always keeps it simple. That'll be an easier meeting and I'll bump Amy into the future. So based on this example, my hope is that you can really start to see why it's so important for you to communicate your ideas simply. You want to be Brenda, not Amy, because the simpler your words are, the more that executives are going to have a positive bias to want to be in rooms with you. And it's the same in all areas of our lives. We don't like things that are complicated. So the example that comes to mind is like doing our taxes. Most people, accountants like it, right? But most normal muggle people who aren't accountants, we don't enjoy doing our taxes because it's very complicated and messy and there's a lot of components. And so as humans, we tend to not enjoy complicated things. We tend to want things to be easy, to be simple, to be intuitive. And I think sometimes we forget this in a corporate environment. And we think, well, I don't want things to be simple. I want people to see how smart I am. I want people to see all the details in the work that I'm doing. But you have to remember that your executive audience has a very limited amount of cognitive capacity to give to you. And if you take them into too much complexity and too much detail, they're just going to shut off and not pay attention to anything. So if you want them to truly understand the depth of the work that you do, you have to lure them in and capture their attention by being simple, building that trust, being Brenda, being the person on the calendar who they want to keep their meeting with. And over time, because you do that, they will grow to understand the complexity of your work and the amazing contribution that you make without you having to explain it in a complicated way. Now, I want to share with you a few ideas for how to simplify the way that you share information. Number one is by eliminating details or keeping details in the appendix. A lot of times clients will ask me, hey, I have all these details, but I'm presenting to a group of executives and I don't know how much of the details to take out and how many to leave in. And what I often will tell my clients is put the details in the appendix and you can actually ask your audience. You can present a slide to an executive and you can say, hey, this is the plan that my team and I are working on. We have more details in the appendix. Do you want to dive into this at a deeper level? And you can actually let your stakeholders guide you so that you can match the level of detail to their appetite. So that's a really good technique. A couple other tips is one, if you have things that are long and complicated, try to break them into chunks or parts and take your audience through each part one at a time. So try to create like a loose structure, try to put things into buckets or categories. That really helps with simplicity. And the final way to simplify is to try to tell stories. Stories are a great way to take something complicated and make it simple. So as you're sharing information with an executive audience, you just want to ask yourself, is there a story that I can tell around this slide? If I had to share it in a story format where there's like a beginning, a middle, and an end, what would that story be? Now, I actually have an entire podcast episode just on how to do this, how to be simple, and how to use structure and stories to make your communication more potent and polished and powerful. It's episode 347, and I will link it in the show notes. So that's S of the STAR framework. Now we're going to move on to T. Can you guess what T stands for? T is a harder one to guess than S. T stands for top down. Of all of the elements that I'm teaching today, This is one that most people forget and most people aren't doing, and it's really important to do. So top-down means that when you are sharing information, you start with the bigger picture before you get into the next level of details. So you start at a high level and then you slowly zoom into the details. Now, the best way for me to really help you understand this is again through an analogy. So I want to share an analogy with you. Here's what I want you to imagine. You get a text from your best friend. You open up your phone, you read the text message, and the text message says, "Should I get rigatoni?" ? That's all it says. And it's completely out of context. You don't understand why your friend is asking you if they should get rigatoni. So you read this text and you feel kind of anxious because you want to respond, but you don't know how to respond because you don't understand the message. So this is an example of communication that is not top down. And you can see that it's very frustrating for the recipient. Like you getting this random question, should I get rigatoni, puts you in a frustrating position because you want to answer, you want to engage, you want to understand the message, but you don't understand it because it's not top down. Now, if your friend was using top-down communication, instead of texting you and saying, should I get rigatoni, first they would send you a text that says, hey, I'm having a dinner party Saturday. And then they would say, I'm going to make macaroni and cheese. And then they would say, I'm trying to decide what pasta to get for the macaroni and cheese. And then they would send you that very same text that says, should I get rigatoni? Now, if your friend sends you those texts, it will be much easier for you to answer. So if I got those texts, I would answer and say, hey, for mac and cheese, typically you want to use like a macaroni or a cavatappi. That shape is a little bit better for the cheese sticking to the pasta and for making everything gooey. You could use rigatoni if you really want to, but it's not a pasta shape that's traditionally meant for mac and cheese. So you can see that once my friend lets me know that she's having a dinner party and she's making mac and cheese and she wants my help picking out what type of pasta to get, now I suddenly am able to answer the question of should I get rigatoni? However, if she just texts me out of the blue and says, should I get rigatoni? I cannot answer the question. I cannot engage. It is frustrating for me and probably frustrating for her as well. So this is a really powerful example to help you understand why top-down communication is so important. As the audience, we need context. We need to understand the bigger picture before the specifics start to make sense with us. So just like in the example I gave, the text messages that explain that your friend is having a dinner party and making mac and cheese helps you understand the question around rigatoni. Similarly, when you are sharing your work with executives, you need to give them that context before you dive into your actual work. So if you kick off a meeting with them saying, hey, here's my marketing plan, I'm excited to walk you through it, that is you being like, should I get rigatoni? For you, it seems like, oh, of course I know what this is. This is my marketing plan. My audience should know what it is. But remember that you're in your head. You already understand the context. You understand the significance of the work that you're doing. Your audience doesn't. Just like in the example I gave you, your friend has a deep understanding of why they are texting you about the rigatoni. They are not at all confused about it when they text you out of the blue. So it doesn't even occur to them to give context because they're so in their head thinking about this rigatoni. And sometimes we do the same thing. We're so focused on our work, we think to ourselves, of course my audience will know what this is. Like I'll just introduce it and explain what it is. And they're going to know what it is because I'm the head of marketing and this is a marketing plan. So like, of course, they're going to understand what this meeting is about. But that's not the case. You always want to take whatever it is you're sharing and you want to zoom out as many steps as possible. And instead of just saying, hey, should I get rigatoni? You really want to ask yourself, hold on, what's the bigger picture here? So if you're sharing a marketing plan with your audience, instead of saying, hey, everyone, I'm excited to walk you through my marketing plan, you might say, hey, everyone, as you know, we're about to head into a huge growth sprint towards the second half of the year. we're going to be launching 2 new products and bringing those out into new markets. Today, I'm going to share with you the marketing plan that my team and I have been working on to help support those products getting out to those new markets. So instead of me saying, hey, here's my marketing plan, or hey, should I get rigatoni? I'm sharing this bigger picture. I'm going top down. When we start at the top, the highest level of information, and then we start to narrow in on the details, our audience can follow along. This is one of the most important things to do. And it's also typically the thing that we forget to do because we are already in the details. So it doesn't occur to us that we need to catch our audience up and give them that bigger context. And I think that we've all had moments in our lives where we've sent someone the rigatoni text, right? Like we are so in the details of our stuff and what we're doing and what we're struggling with and what we're focused on that we forget that the other person isn't caught up to us. So we'll text someone something and it won't make sense to them. And we'll have to catch them up and help them understand what we were trying to say to them. So this is the thing that we just do as humans. We get caught in the details of our own lives and our own ways of thinking about things and seeing things. And when we're talking to executives in particular, we have to be very aware of that. And we have to meet them at the highest possible level of context and share the bigger picture before we get into the details. Now, I also have an episode that will help you get better at this. It is episode 355, and I'm going to link all of these episodes in the show notes so that for each of these 4 parts of the STAR framework, you know which episodes you can tune into to learn more about that part of the framework. Okay, so we've done S, simple. We've done T, top down. So we have 2 more parts of the framework, A and R. Before I get into A and R, we're going to take a quick break and then we will dive right back in. If you love the Art of Speaking Up podcast and you love how it makes you feel inspired and energized and motivated, then you are going to love my weekly newsletter. Every Wednesday, I send a quick message of inspiration or advice or encouragement to help you grow your confidence as a leader and show up super powerfully in your role at work. If you are craving more advice on how to find your voice and shine as a leader, and you want to make sure not to miss any of the career tips that I share with my audience, then I want to invite you to join my weekly newsletter. You can sign up using the link in the show notes, and as soon as you sign up, the very first newsletter will be sent your way. Once again, you can find the link in the show notes, and now let's get back to the episode. Okay, so recap. We are learning the STAR framework for executive communication, and we have covered S and T, and now we're going to cover A and R in the framework. So can you guess what A stands for in the STAR framework? This is also one that most people forget about, but not you. After listening to this episode, you are going to be really good at this. The A stands for action-oriented. This is extremely, extremely important. Action-oriented means that when you run a meeting, you give a presentation, you facilitate a discussion, you are not just there to share information, you are there to take action. There is a big difference between sharing information, which is passive, versus moving everyone towards an end goal, which is active. And you can feel the difference when you're in a meeting that's more passive, where nothing is getting done, there's no direction, it doesn't feel like things are moving, versus a meeting that is action-oriented, where it feels like we're showing up, we're getting it done, we're taking action, we're moving things forward. That is the vibe that you want to be creating in the rooms where you are leading, and the way that you speak should reflect that. Now, to help you learn and understand this part of the framework, we have a third analogy. So today's episode is packed with analogies. Here's what I want you to imagine to really help you understand what it means to be action-oriented. I want you to imagine that you signed up for a cooking class. Let's just say you signed up for a donut making class. I'm picking that as the example because I took a donut making class. It was super fun. So let's say you signed up for a donut making class and you want to learn to make donuts. So you get to the cooking class, you're standing in front of your donut station, And the instructor starts talking about donuts and talking about flour and talking about frosting and talking about yeast and talking about the different types of donuts and talking about sprinkles and talking about decorating them. And you're sitting in this cooking class, and let's just say it's like an hour-long cooking class, and 20 minutes have gone by, and the instructor is just talking about donuts and not telling you what to do, not telling you to pick up the dough or to pick up the chocolate or anything. And the clock keeps ticking, and the class keeps going, and the class ends, and the instructor never told you to do anything. And you leave the class thinking like, what the heck? I just signed up for a cooking class and we didn't cook anything. That's what it's like when you're in a meeting in corporate and the person leading the meeting isn't action-oriented. It feels like all these people were gathered here to do something, and then the person who is supposed to be leading them just blathered on and nothing was actually done. So a meeting that is lacking in this quality will feel like a cooking class where no one actually cooks. Action-oriented means that you are the cooking instructor who, as soon as everyone gets to their station, you say, all right, we're going to start with the dough. Everyone pick up your cup of flour. And as soon as you say that, everyone in the room feels a sense of trust and relief because you're taking charge, you're guiding them, you're leading them. They know they're going to get what they came for. And the same is true when you're running a meeting in corporate. You're obviously not telling your executives to create donuts, but as soon as they come into your meeting, they're thinking, is this going to be a waste of my time? Like, let's just be real with ourselves for a second. That is one of the things that your audience is likely thinking. Is this going to be a waste of my time? And just like in the cooking class, if the instructor starts blathering on and no donuts are being made, just like in that situation, you might think, oh my gosh, I got duped. My time is being wasted. Similarly, if you start your meeting and there's no action that is being taken and you haven't made it clear to your audience what action is being taken, then they're going to feel like their time isn't being used well. So whenever you are talking to leaders or executives, I really want you to think about, what did I bring them here to do? What is the action that is happening? And I want you to be super clear about that, not just in the beginning, but throughout. You want to keep bringing everyone back to that reason, that action, that milestone that you are all crossing together in the meeting. And it doesn't matter what the milestone is. It could be a decision. It could be an approval. It could be that you need to make sure that they understand the work that your team is doing. It could be that you need them to look at your proposal and identify any potential roadblocks. So there are so many things that the action could be. You want to be crystal clear on that in your mind, and you want to hit on that right away, and you want to keep everyone focused on that throughout the meeting. Now, because this is a deeper topic, I have an entire podcast episode that goes into how to be action-oriented when speaking to executives and running meetings. This is episode 322. And like with all the others that I've mentioned, I will link it in the show notes in case you want to go deeper. Now, the final part of the STAR framework is R. So we've done S, T, and A. Simple, top-down, action-oriented. And now we are doing the final piece of executive communication, which is R, which stands for results-focused. Results-focused means that when you talk about something, you also highlight the positive result that it is creating for your stakeholders and for your organization. So the easiest way for you to understand this is, again, through an analogy. Analogy number 4. Okay, so I want you to imagine that there's a road, and on the side of the road, there are people that are selling produce. And let's just imagine that on this road, people are selling oranges. So on the left side of the road, Amy is selling oranges, and her sign says oranges, $1. Now, I also want you to imagine on the right side of the road, Brenda is selling oranges, and they're the same, but her sign says oranges, a great source of vitamin C to keep you feeling refreshed and healthy, $1. Okay, so there's Amy. Her sign says oranges, $1. And there's Brenda. Her sign says oranges, a great source of vitamin C to keep you feeling refreshed and healthy, $1. Who is going to sell more oranges, Amy or Brenda? For sure, Brenda, for sure. Hands down, Brenda's going to sell more oranges Because Brenda's sign is results focused. She's not just talking about the oranges, she's talking about how the oranges will help you feel healthy and refreshed because of the vitamin C. Now, in some ways, you might think, well, this is kind of silly. They're both selling the same oranges, but everyone's going to buy Brenda's oranges just because she's talking about this whole vitamin C thing. But Amy's oranges still have vitamin C, so people should still buy Amy's oranges. But this is not how human behavior works. We are drawn towards what is presented to us in a compelling and persuasive way, which means that when you are speaking to executives, they're going to be drawn to the leaders and the people within the company who know how to present work and ideas to them in an appealing and compelling way. And this means you have to go beyond just talking about the work, and you have to highlight the way the work is benefiting them and adding value for them and the organization. And a lot of times we do what Amy is doing with the oranges on the side of the highway. We don't want to brag. We don't want to take up too much space. So we just share our work humbly. We don't talk about the value we're adding. We don't highlight the success stories, but we think to ourselves, my work is so good that people are going to make that connection for themselves. They will realize, they will notice, they will get it. Unfortunately, this just isn't how human behavior works. Executives will always be more impressed by the people who explicitly highlight why their work is impressive. We don't want to rely on a sign that says oranges $1 to try to help us get ahead in our careers. If we want to become leaders, we want a reputation as someone who is highly capable, who gets things done, then we have to have the courage to make the most powerful freaking orange sign that anyone has ever seen. So when you talk about your work, you don't want to just talk about the work itself. You really want to highlight all of the positive results that your work is creating for your organization. And you should always have a list of those. When I'm working with my clients inside of the Art of Speaking Up Academy, one of the exercises that I do with them is I have them make a list of all of the ways that their work benefits the organization so that they have those talking points at the ready. You never want to just talk about the thing you're working on. You always want to talk about the growth, the breakthroughs, the solution, the innovation, the positive results, the metrics, the KPIs, the successes. You want to be talking about all of those juicy things just as much as you're talking about the work itself. This is what is going to help people see you as a leader. We can't ask our executive audience to do the mental work of connecting those dots for us. We have to be willing to connect those dots for them and talk about why our work, why our suggestion, why our initiative is benefiting them and the organization. And just like with the other 3 parts of the STAR framework, I have an entire episode that explains this in detail if you want to go deeper. It is episode 348, and I'm going to link this episode and all of these episodes in the show notes because these are deep topics. Like each part of this STAR framework has an entire podcast episode dedicated to it simply because there's so much to talk about and so many layers to each of these. And so I will link all of those for your listening pleasure so that you can dive in. And I'm going to quickly recap the STAR framework so that you can walk away remembering how to make your communication excellent. So S stands for simple. Try to remove the details, add a simple structure, and present your information in a clean, coherent way. The next letter is T. It stands for top down. Before getting into the topic, before getting into the details, start with the bigger picture context of how your work plugs into the broader objectives of the organization. A stands for action-oriented. Instead of sharing information, think about it as you're in the room to take action, figure out what that action is, and talk about it explicitly. And the last part of the framework is R. R stands for results focused. This means that in addition to talking about what you're doing, you're also talking about how that work is benefiting both the stakeholders in the room and your organization as a whole. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you found this useful and you feel like you learned something from this episode, please share it with a friend or a coworker who would benefit from learning the STAR framework. I am so grateful to those of you who have shared the show. This is the main way that the Art of Speaking Up podcast has grown, is people sharing it with their friends. So if you can think of someone who doesn't know about the show and would probably love to dive in, please share this episode with them. Thank you so much for being here, for tuning in, and I am so excited to catch you next week. Bye.